Game of Thrones is not a fairy tale, and it was not written to be a fairy tale, whereas Tolkien wrote The Lord of the Rings to be a fairy tale. A lot of people don't know what a fairy tale is. What is a fairy tale versus what is not a fairy tale, and what is the purpose of a fairy tale? The fairy tale, in matters of fantasy, has the objective purpose, Tolkien would argue, especially in his essay on fairy tales. That's what it's called, On Fairy Tales. It's one of his most famous essays. The purpose of the fairy tale is to do two things. The first is to create enchantment. Enchantment is almost like a blooming of one's spirit. You know, when you read stories of King Arthur pulling the sword from the stone, or you look at like a story of Thor, like fighting the world serpent, or even like, you know, simple like fairy tales, you know, because these are all fairy tales in Tolkien's minds. Like myths are just grander fairy tales. All of them kind of have this purpose of creating enchantment. And that enchantment moves you into a state of bliss. It makes you want to be strong, like Thor. It makes you want to be more virtuous. It makes you want to go on an adventure. And one of the biggest things that it does is that Tolkien does a beautiful metaphor in his essay on fairy stories. He used color as an example, where he said, like, when you're a child, the act of painting is like magic. You know, you're combining all these colors together and capturing all these hues, and you're looking out your window and you're seeing all these beautiful colors in creation. And it moves you. You're enchanted by it as a child. It's like a form of magic as you move the brush over your canvas. But then you get older and you learn the three primary colors. You learn red, blue, and green, right? Or is it red, blue, yellow? I'm pretty sure it's red, blue, green. You learn your three primary colors, and you learn that all the other colors are just coming out of these. And suddenly, color and art and painting becomes very mathematical. It becomes very robbed of its wonder and of its enchantment. And suddenly, the thing that once gave you such great joy is just simply, I don't know the best way to put it. It's very dull. It's just the way things are now. It's figured out. Life can be kind of boring. Especially today, you know, in our modern society where life is just simply cooming and consuming, as the internet would put it. It's just simply the consumption and the pursuit of entertainment and comforts. And the more entertainment and comfort that you possess, the more good your life is. And it's all rather boring and dull, and the fairy tale has the role of creating enchantment again in the mundane. The knight adorns his steed with a red saddle, and this allows the horse to ride faster and gallop for days without end. And suddenly, red becomes enchanted. And suddenly the color red becomes magical again. And you look at this normally mundane thing with a new appreciation. And it's through fairy tales that this enchantment is achieved. Because suddenly the mind enchanted by the fairy tale suddenly goes out into the woods, and you start to look for Ents. And you start to look for small hands moving the leaves in the wind. You are enchanted, and you are filled with a love of all beautiful things. And this is the purpose of the fairy tale. But the fairy tale also has another purpose, Tolkien would argue, and that is escapism. Because in the mundaneness of the world, and in just the simple pursuits of advancing career and paying your bills and whatever, we naturally seek escapism. Especially in times of great sorrow and stress and depression and hardship, we desire escape. We need a break. And we need to be reminded of the wonder of life, the beauty of things. And that is what fairy tales and these sorts of stories give us. Because suddenly, when we read the story of Odin, who is called Fimbultyr, when he rides out of Valhall to fight the Fenris wolf, and we see this heroic act of bravery, we too are moved by the virtue of bravery and courage in the face of even one's own doom. Or we see, the young boy pulling the sword out of the stone in the Arthurian legend or whatever, and we're moved by these stories. And so, for a time, we escape. And that also is the function of the fairy tale. And Tolkien also would argue that the fairy tale also should, a good fairy tale anyway, should end on a eucatastrophe. I used that word earlier. Not everybody knows what it means. A eucatastrophe is when all things seem lost, and everything seems hopeless, and suddenly, at the last moment, there is this great turning. This great moment of joy and grace is experienced, and the good outshines the evil that seemed to be snuffing it out. Tolkien argues that the fairy tale does not dismiss the reality of that there is sadness and sorrow and suffering and death and calamity in the world, but what the fairy tale reminds the person who reads it is that a fairy tale reminds that in the end, there is always hope. And that, I forget how Tolkien specifically put it, it affirms, it doesn't, the fairy tale never affirms true defeat. There is no true defeat. There will always be the victory for what is beautiful in the end.